Due to global warming, the Earth is becoming hotter and hotter at an alarming rate. In the past year, we've lost over 1 trillion tons of ice, and that number is not slowing down. The goal of the Paris Climate Agreement is to reduce global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And on December 12, 2015, this agreement was first signed to help fight climate change and global warming. Currently, there are 194 countries all over the globe involved in this diplomatic agreement. However, many debate that although it might help the climate, it will cause more consequences to the global economy and to major industries than it's worth. According to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Climate Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 parties at COP21 in Paris on December 12, 2015, and entered into force on November 4, 2016. Although the Paris Climate Agreement is legally binding, that only applies to certain aspects of the agreement. And for many countries, determining which aspects to make legally binding is a problem. There are certain mandatory commitments, though. For instance, the Center for Climate and Energy Solution tells us that countries are required to maintain successive nationally determined contributions and to report on progress in implementing them. In an article written by the UNFCCC, the Paris Climate Agreement works on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate action carried out by countries to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. In other words, each country must create and submit a new nationally determined contribution, or NDC, every 5 years with even greater goals. Although the Paris Climate Agreement sounds like an obvious plan to take part in, there are a few problems with it which give cause for debate. The issues of the Paris Climate Agreement and whether or not countries should join it are a very in-depth and difficult problem to solve. In 2015, Barack Obama officially committed to the Paris Climate Agreement, but less than 2 years later, Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from the plan. Then, in 2021, President Biden rejoined it again. Political rivalries and diplomatic tension make the balance of inequalities portion of the Paris Climate Agreement particularly hard to implement. For instance, the U.S. agreed to voluntarily pay $3 billion under the commitments made by President Obama. What this means is that the industrialized and well-developed countries, such as the U.S., are pressuring less developed countries to avoid fossil fuels altogether and move straight to clean energy, which is incredibly difficult due to their lack of financial support. As stated in a Healthy Human article, efforts to measure, track, and monitor greenhouse gases lack standardization and may not live up to the agreement's stated aim of transparency. In other words, it is hard to get countries to follow through with their goals for reducing the rise of temperatures enough because the agreement has no form of accountability, and all goals are completely voluntary. If this plan is going to work, then all countries must collaborate together on this agreement. The key to the Paris Climate Agreement is full participation from as many countries as possible, and for a long period of time, the U.S. was the only major CO2 emitting country that was not part of the agreement. This is another pitfall of the Paris Climate Agreement, being that it can only work if countries completely follow through with their goals. This is a very big issue because if one large country falls short of their goal or quits altogether like the U.S., it can render the other country's contributions useless. Because of this, it is very important to put pressure on governments to stay committed to their goals and not resign like the U.S. did in 2020. In order for this climate agreement to work, more countries have to take on the challenge to do their fair share of the work. India is one of the only countries that has actually surpassed their 5-year NDC. If high CO2 emitting countries like China and the USA can adapt to the Paris Climate Agreement in the same way India did, we might have a fighting chance in the battle with climate change. Although it is easy to give up and consider the Paris Agreement a lost cause, there are many things that can be done to save it. The goal of the Paris Climate Agreement is to limit global warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, but the reason for that specific temperature is that as the Earth becomes hotter, there will be much more pronounced weather patterns, such as severe heat waves, flooding, then extreme drought, which will all worsen as temperature rises above 2 degrees. To make the Paris Climate Agreement possible, there are several ways it can be changed. In an article written by Climate Change Analytics, increased transparency, clarity, and integrity in the 2020 updates would make it easier to access collective progress and identify opportunities for improvement. But increased transparency and integrity cannot be traded for increased ambition and mitigation targets. The two must come hand in hand. So if the accuracy of climate change updates and monitoring can be improved, then the Paris Climate Agreement will be better equipped to efficiently reach climate change goals. In another article written by Climate Change Analytics, getting NDCs in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit requires a transformational ramping up of ambition for the period to 2030 and beyond. The overall goals of NDCs must be increased in order to reduce the 2030 emissions levels by at least 50% and reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. Regardless of this, the first step to making any of this work is to try, and so far, there are far from enough countries really trying to make the agreement work. The Paris Climate Agreement was designed and created to help fight climate change in the best way possible, yet there is strong debate as whether it'll help or whether it will cause more harm to the global economy and to major industries. Countries such as the US have been debating whether to join or not, but it is safe to say that joining the Paris Climate Agreement is a mandatory step in order to make the world a safe place to live. The Paris Climate Agreement, if executed properly, can save the world from what has happened but people have denied has been coming for decades. Increased temperature, rising sea levels, severe weather patterns, flooding, drought, and more. Not only do we know what global warming is and what it will do to us, but the perfect solution already exists and the world is choosing not to use it. It is one thing to become aware and acknowledge what is to come, but it is a whole nother step to have the bravery to take action and do what is right to save our future.